Now that we have our pyruvate molecule, there are a couple of options, all right? Option number one is if there is no oxygen around, so that would mean we are in anaerobic conditions, then pyruvate would actually get converted into something called lactate. People also commonly refer to lactate as lactic acid. Your muscles ever burn after you do a heavy workout, right? That's lactic acid burning in those muscles, right? Because your cells have been depleted of oxygen. So when they need to make that energy, they tend to just stick with this pathway where they convert pyruvate into lactate. Now, converting pyruvate into lactate requires energy. So I'm going to actually move this statement so that way we have room. Basically what has to happen is NADH is used as an energy source to fuel this reaction, leaving us with NAD plus and lactate, or also called lactic acid. Sound good? And then in the liver, you don't need to know this part, but just for your own edification, if you're curious, in the liver, lactate is actually used to then make more glucose. So that way later, when you do have oxygen, you can use that glucose to generate a lot of energy when there's oxygen around, all right? But this is the no oxygen environment model of how you can at least get a little bit of energy, right? You get a net total of 2 ATPs and 2 NADHs, which honestly, it's better than nothing, right? So that's good. But it's not nearly as good as having oxygen around where you can actually carry out the rest of cellular respiration in the citric acid cycle. So some of you may be wondering, where does this NADH over here come from? And that actually comes from this guy up here. So NADH that was produced up there actually gets used, and that NAD plus can be used then again to restart this cycle and act as an acceptor of that hydrogen later in the process. Does that kind of make sense? So it's all a crazy awesome cycle. Sound good? Now, what if there is oxygen? If there is oxygen, this 3-carbon molecule pyruvate, these guys will go on to enter the mitochondria. Remember the mitochondria? It's an organelle inside of the cell, so we're still inside of the same cell. And the mitochondria has a double membrane, right? So membrane number 1, membrane number 2. So here, right here is inside of the mitochondria. And so pyruvate, if oxygen is present, so if yes, oxygen, then pyruvate will go into the cell.
And in one of your videos, we actually talk about how it goes into the mitochondria through a series of channels.
And it is in the mitochondria that the citric acid cycle, I should say the citric acid cycle, which is why a lot of people call it the TCA cycle. And then other people will also call this the Krebs cycle, named after the guy who came up with this or who discovered this. Ain't it always? All right. So either way you call it is fine, as long as you know you're talking about the same thing. This is what happens in the mitochondria if oxygen is present, all right? And the cycle occurs 1 pyruvate at a time. So we're actually going to just focus on as 1 pyruvate at a time, and then we'll do math later. Sound good?